All right, good morning, everyone. This morning here from the Alberta NDP caucus, responding to the Wyant report released this morning, we have our Deputy Leader, Raki Pancholi, our House Leader, Christina Gray, and our Shadow Minister for Health, Sarah Hoffman, to deliver some comments and answer some questions. Turn it over to Raki.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of Treaty 6 and the Métis people of Alberta, who share a very deep connection to this land. So I'm gathered today with my colleagues Christina Gray and Sarah Hoffman to respond to the report that was released earlier today, the Wyant report, as we're calling it, into the corrupt care allegations against the UCP government. So that report that was released today really shows what Albertans already knew, that AHS procurement policies were not followed and that there was a clear conflict of interest in the Turkish Tylenol and private contracted surgical facilities contracts. Albertans have known about this since former AHS CEO Athana Mentzelopoulos' allegations became public in February. But what the report does not answer is the question of who in the UCP directed or encouraged the conflict of interest and that those procurement policies shouldn't be followed. The report does not answer the question of why the former CEO of AHS and board of AHS were fired for investigating these same issues. The Premier's statements today about the Wyant report into the UCP's corrupt care scandal are simply not true. Today, she said the report found that she and her UCP ministers and staff acted appropriately. What the Premier is trying to suggest is that her government has been cleared of any wrongdoing, but this is simply not true. It is not what the report says at all. Judge Wyant himself concluded in the report that he cannot make that assessment because the Premier did not give him the authority to make that assessment. He couldn't require people to be interviewed by him. He couldn't require them to answer his questions if they did sit down with him. And he couldn't require that they give him the records he needed to see. The Premier says Judge Wyant's report clears her and her ministers, but not a single one of them, not one UCP elected official or their staff agreed to be interviewed by Judge Wyant. Repeatedly, the Premier and Justice Minister Mickey Amery stood in the legislature and said the UCP would fully cooperate with investigations. And yet not one of them sat down to be interviewed by Judge Wyant for the investigation that they appointed. Danielle Smith would love it for Albertans to think that this issue is over, but it is not. The one central question that has still not been answered and that the Premier has gone to great lengths to cover up is what role did she, her ministers, and her staff go to direct AHS or encourage AHS staff to disregard AHS procurement policies, act in a conflict of interest, and line the pockets of the UCP's friends? What role did they play? This is the heart of the corruption allegations against the UCP. And this report does not answer that question because the Premier never intended it to. And only a public inquiry will. I'm now going to turn over to my colleague, Christina Gray.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raki. From the very beginning, we have called for a full, independent public inquiry. For the corrupt care report released today by Justice Wyant, it did not have the tools to subpoena witnesses, compel testimony, and he had very limited scope. And as we see laid out on pages 4 and 5 of this report, incredibly clearly, he could not pursue issues that were raised because of the terms he was bound to. Some people refused to be interviewed. Some interviewees refused to answer certain questions. He says in his report that he was left with the impression that some people were lying or hiding information. Not a single politician, not a member of the cabinet was interviewed, and none of the current political staff were interviewed either. The only way for Albertans to get answers into the corrupt care scandal about potential political interference from the Premier and her ministers is a full public inquiry. And that is why the official opposition and many, many others have been calling for a full public inquiry from the beginning. Today, Albertans are left with hundreds of millions of dollars of wasted taxpayer money, a healthcare system that is in far worse shape than it ever should have been, and a Premier who refuses to acknowledge their own impact in making the healthcare system so much worse. Justice Wyant has told us by stating what he was not allowed to see and who he was not allowed to investigate, what everybody already guessed was true, And as the saying goes, the fish rots from the head. Albertans must hold Danielle Smith accountable for the hundreds of millions of dollars of tax dollars, public money, that may have been inappropriately misused or lost, that may have been used to line the pockets of friends and insiders. Times are too tough for the average family to let this Premier keep wasting money at every single turn. And today, we once again call on the Premier to do the right thing, the only thing that will clear her name potentially, and that is a full public inquiry. Without that, this scandal will remain. Every day she does not call a full public inquiry is another day that Albertans have the reason to believe this is a cover-up. I'll turn things over to our Shadow Minister of Health, Sarah Hoffman.
Thanks, Christina. Sorry. This is why we use binders normally. Here we go. So the report that was released today actually tells us very little that's new. We already knew most of this. The exact nature of why the CEO was fired and what AHS has been saying all year, which is that they were interfered with. It confirms that the Turkish Tylenol deal was bad for Albertans because friends of the government got bloated contracts for children's pain medication that wasn't even able to be used here in Alberta on Alberta patients. And it confirms that the bloated private surgical contracts weren't written up with due process and that hundreds of millions of dollars were spent and went to friends and insiders. Ultimately, it confirms something very disturbing for Albertans. Clearly, the UCP did not put patients first. They have not put the stability or sustainability of public healthcare first. They certainly didn't put cost-effective management of that healthcare system first. No, the UCP government decided to do what they always have done, put their friends and insiders first. That needs to change. The Premier, the Minister, let me speak directly to them. Premier, Minister, every member of the UCP, you need to do the right thing. You need to call a public inquiry. We've been saying this for months, and the stalling line that the Premier used was, wait until the judge's report comes out. Well, it's out, and it says that there was corruption, and we need to make sure that we act in the public interest through a public inquiry to get to the bottom of it. It doesn't answer the questions of why the former CEO and AHS board were fired, and when they were calling for an investigation onto these very issues and wanted to call the RCMP. The Premier's statement about the Wyatt report into UCP's corrupt care scandal today simply isn't true. Today she said that the report found that she and her UCP ministers and staff acted appropriately. There's no way. The Premier's trying to suggest that her government has been cleared of wrongdoing, and we know that that's not accurate. So it's important for all of us to get to the truth and to get to the bottom of it, and the only way that'll happen is with a public inquiry. I'm happy for us to take your questions.
All right, thank you very much. We'll begin with two questions in the room, and then for those joining us online, if you could raise your hand, we'll come to you. If you could let us know your name and which media outlet you are with, that would be very much appreciated. So those, I'll look to the room if you have any questions.
Catherine Grukowski, All Alberta. So you said that this was stuff you knew all along, but were there any surprises, anything new for you in that report that surprised you?
Thank you for the question. So I think what we did see was confirmation that current Chief of Staff to Premier Smith, Rob Anderson, certainly seemed to play a role in the appointment of Jitendra Prasad into a role when he had a conflict of interest. There seemed to be a suggestion there that his job was recovered as a result of conversations with the Premier Chief of Staff. But I think what we really overall saw that was a confirmation of is that, you know, we suspected and we'd heard allegations from the former CEO of AHS about the procurement policies. There was lots of allegations that included breach of procurement policies and conflict of interest. This confirmed that. However, overall, what we also saw was that the UCP confirmed that they don't want to answer these questions, that they were not willing to be interviewed, that they are not willing to cooperate fully with the investigations. It's the list of people that the Judge Wyatt had the opportunity to interview is conspicuously absent of any of the Premier's staff, the Minister of Health. We know that there was the Minister of Finance might have been involved, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, absolutely the Minister of Justice, and yet none of those individuals were interviewed, nor were their staff. And so what was surprising was that the UCP would be so blatant about not complying and cooperating with the own investigation, which they declared to Albertans would answer the questions about where hundreds of millions of dollars of Alberta taxpayer dollars that should have gone to improve healthcare, where it went. They were absolutely determined to not answer those questions for Albertans. And the Premier's statements today indicate that she intended for this report in this investigation to be a whitewash. She set it up that way, and then she's using it as a whitewash. She is claiming that the report reaches conclusions which it does not, and she is clearly wanting to avoid any transparency and light being shed on what role her government, her ministers had in directing health taxpayer dollars being funneled over to friends and family, and she is determined to not answer that question.
And I guess I'm asking you to speculate with this next question, but I asked for a copy of the interim report. The government said it will not be released. What are maybe some reasons for an interim report not to be released?
Well, I know Christina and Sarah and I both were sitting in the legislature earlier this spring when Justice Minister Mickey Amery stood up and repeatedly stated that the interim report that Judge Wyant filed would be made public and would be released to Albertans to review for this very reason. One can assume that, you want to see the interim report because the difference between an interim report and final report, if only government gets to see it and only the Premier and her ministers gets to see it, means that perhaps some of the outcomes that are listed in that final report have been influenced in some way by the government, or that some direction has been given by the government to change some content in that interim report. So we know that the Justice Minister stood in that House and said clearly that all Albertans would be able to see that interim report, and then they did not release that. They certainly didn't release it on the timelines that they set out, but they did not release it at all. So I think Albertans are left to question, once again, what was in that interim report, but also why does the UCP seem determined at every step to provide a lack of transparency, to not answer the questions that are important to Albertans, and to hide the role that they may play in influencing the outcome of these investigations, but also into the actions of AHS officials when these contracts were assigned. They've been very clear that they do not want any light to be shed on that, and continuing to hide the interim report is also another proof point for that.
All right, and I'll just look to the room if there's any other outlets that are looking to ask questions today. Yep, I'll turn over to you.
Darcy Robchan, City News Edmonton. With the findings of these reports, with the Premier saying she'll look into these recommendations, how likely do you think a public inquiry is, or how do you keep pushing for that as opposition?
Well, look, we're here because this is a very serious issue. These are allegations of the most serious potential corruption in Alberta's history. This is overshadowing many of the very real challenges that Albertans are facing every single day. We talk every day with Albertans across this province who are speaking to us about they can't get access to a surgery in a reasonable amount of time. They can't have access to a family doctor like they need. You hear about the emergency wait times. I just had a parent that I spoke to in my constituency last week talk about waiting for emergency care for his son for 12 hours, which is very difficult for any Albertan to experience. These are serious issues because those are not the issues that the government is addressing right now. As long as we're continuing to talk about the suggestions and allegations, very real ones, that hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars have gone from the healthcare system into bloated contracts for political stunts on Turkish Tylenol or bloated contracts for contracted surgical facilities, the more we're talking about that, the less we're talking about the priorities of Albertans, which is delivering quality healthcare to Albertans when they need it. So the Premier has the opportunity and has had the opportunity from February of this year to call a public inquiry to put an end to this speculation, to get the answers that Albertans need. The longer she drags this out, The longer she continues to try to hide answers to these questions, the longer this will continue to be a distraction for Albertans and for this government from answering the real questions Albertans have about healthcare. We are still going to be seeing an RCMP investigation at some point concluded. We'll see an Auditor General's report concluded. All along, the official opposition has been saying, have that public inquiry, get to the heart of the issues, answer those questions for Albertans so we can move on to the really key issues of delivering better healthcare for Albertans, delivering better public education, and focusing on the priorities of Albertans who are struggling to make ends meet right now.
All right, thank you. We're going to turn to our online colleagues joining us. First, I have Alexandra from Lethbridge Herald, if you'd like to ask your question.
Alexandra from the Lethbridge Herald. What I'm hearing is that there's a lot of discrepancies between what the report says and what Danielle Smith is saying what happened. I guess my question is, why, if the report is available for people to read, why do you think that Danielle Smith is just hiding whatever she, hiding what the report is saying?
Thank you for that question. I will say that I believe the Premier is insulting the intelligence of Albertans when she tries to claim that the report is saying something that it doesn't. Now look, Albertans are focused with the priorities of their day-to-day life. We know that they're struggling to make ends meet. Cost of living continues to be the top priority for Albertans. We have a teachers' strike with 51,000 teachers on strike right now, over 700,000 students not in school. We have Albertans from every age group who are struggling to get access to health care. Are they going to have the time to look through this report? Maybe not. And so I think it shouldn't be too much to ask that they can trust what their Premier says is honest and truthful. Unfortunately, this Premier has a track record of not being honest and truthful, and for her to do that today, to claim that the report clears her and her ministers of any wrongdoing when it clearly does not, is incredibly insulting to Albertans, and it undermines their faith and their trust in a government which frankly has already done a great deal to undermine their trust and their faith in them. So I hope Albertans take the time to read that report, but if they haven't, I can tell you that my colleagues and I have read the report. It clearly states that the judge has indicated that he could only make a determination based on the limited amount of evidence that was provided to him based on who agreed to be interviewed, which did not include any UCP ministers or the Premier, that he could only base his determination based on what answers were given to questions in those interviews, and many people did not answer all the questions in interviews. And he could only answer questions based on the documents that were given to him, not the ones that he wanted to see. So based on that, he said he could not find evidence of that wrongdoing, but that is not the same thing as saying that he can clearly state that the Premier, the UCP ministers, and her staff acted appropriately. So what the Premier said today was frankly completely untruthful, and Albertans should be concerned that they cannot trust the words coming out of their Premier's mouth.
Thank you, Alexandra. And do you have a follow-up?
I do. This is kind of more of a side question. On Tuesday, a bunch of AHS higher up employees were fired. Do you have anything to comment on that?
Absolutely. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Hoffman.
Thanks, Raki. Yes, earlier this week, another 100 healthcare workers were told that their jobs were eliminated and that their families had even more to stress about now. And Danielle Smith is doing all of this at strategic moments. We're in the middle of a teacher strike. There's a huge affordability crisis. She likes to pretend that she can point fingers at others for wrongdoing, but the truth is that the buck stops with the Premier and the Minister. And I will say, if they stay in their own lanes, things usually go well. I will say, when I was health minister, AHS actually won international awards for their procurement process. There wasn't what we see today under the UCP, which is direct political interference, many investigations underway, one coming out, and even though Albertans were promised, because public money was spent on this corrupt care cover-up, that the interim report would be made public, they did not make it public. Now they say they refuse to make it public. They're releasing it here on the end of week 2 of a province-wide strike that's causing huge pressure on Alberta families. And at the same time, just a week or 2 ago, they told AHS non-unionized staff that they all had to take 2 days off without pay. And then now they've told another 100 that they're all laid off. They are clearly creating as many opportunities for distraction. They aren't fit to manage a budget. This is their attempt to manage the AHS budget, is to tell everyone they have to take 2 days off without pay and then lay off another 100 people. This is totally irresponsible. It's not serious, and it's not respectful of public dollars or the people working hard to serve the public. So, as Raki said, on this specific topic, we're calling for a completely independent public inquiry, and we call on the Premier and the ministers to do the right thing and restore some sanity and common sense and leadership to their government. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, next online we have Lisa Johnson.
Hey, can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Great, thanks. I'm wondering, the Premier lays some pretty clear blame in her statement on AHS. She says she's deeply disappointed with the way procurements and contracts were dealt with by AHS decision makers and some of its employees. I'm wondering what degree of blame should be laid at the feet of AHS, and Wyant says himself that there were instances where AHS staff didn't follow AHS's own procurement rules. So yeah, I'm wondering what degree of blame lays with AHS here?
Well, the first question I imagine under a public inquiry would be, why didn't they follow their processes? And I will say that when the former chief of staff to the Premier says that his guy is now working in the department and can do a lot, that probably says there was a reason why they didn't follow their procedures and practices. When I was a minister, they did. They won international awards for getting good value for dollar for taxpayers, making sure that we had supplies delivered on time. It's a very different story under the UCP, and Daniel Smith and Christina Gray will say more.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. And we have seen this pattern from this Premier so many times, and Albertans deserve better. She will blame anyone and anything other than taking full accountability. And in this case, we have a government that started doing what's called ministerial directives, telling AHS how they need to do things and how they need to speed things up. They had ministers and political staff who were reaching in to change what normally happened, to try to influence it. And the report that we are now looking at makes extremely clear that it does not tell the full story, because it couldn't. It wasn't a full public inquiry. They couldn't talk to everyone they needed to. They couldn't see the documents they needed to. They couldn't even make people answer questions. This is a complete whitewash. And now Danielle Smith is mischaracterizing, lying about what this report says, and trying to blame AHS, when we can clearly see we need a full public inquiry, that this government was doing things that previous governments had never done.
Thank you. Lisa, do you have a follow-up?
No, that's it for me, thanks.
All right, I see we have 2 more hands up online, and then we'll come back to the room for a last check. Next up, please, is Cindy Tran.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks so much for taking my question. I am wondering, you've been calling for a public inquiry for a number of months now. So the OAG still has an investigation coming. I understand he has a little bit more breadth and a little bit more power than Judge Wyant did, and also the RCMP are investigating. Do you think that would be enough if a public inquiry is not called?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. A full public inquiry is required in order to get to the bottom of what is happening here, particularly because although the Auditor General has a few more powers of inquiry, he does have a mandated scope. The RCMP investigation is fully independent. We have no way of knowing what they're looking into or how, and we shouldn't. But the government should be calling a full public inquiry for corruption scandals of this nature and breadth in the past. That's what we've seen at different levels of government. That's what's required to be able to actually clear all of these allegations and get through to this. And you are correct that the official opposition and many other stakeholders have been calling for a full public inquiry for almost, it feels like a year. Quite a number of times in the legislature and in every venue that we can, for the reasons that are outlined on pages 4 and 5 of this report. 4 and 5, if you're only going to read 2 pages, are the best pages to take a look at, because they clearly outline all the ways that this report does not deliver conclusive findings, that this report could not look into a number of different avenues of inquiry, and that this report did not have the power to subpoena or to require witnesses or documents. I'll see.
I just have one.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Christina. I just wanted to add that one of the limitations that the Auditor General has is that he's limited in looking at whether government policies and procurement processes were followed. The heart of the allegations that has captured the attention and the concern of Albertans is the allegations around political interference into those policies and procedures. And so even the Auditor General, with his broader scope of authority to be able to compel documents and witnesses, is not going to be able to look into the allegations that the Premier or her staff, that the Minister of Health, the Minister of Justice, or their staff directly interfered into how those processes were followed. So again, we've maintained that there is, by breaking this up into all these little pieces, we're going to get snippets of a story, but the heart of the issue that is really a concern for Albertans is the level of political interference into these decisions, and that can only be addressed and have clear conclusions from a public inquiry.
Thank you. And Cindy, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I am wondering, do you think a public inquiry will actually be called? Because again, in the Premier's statement today, she is pushing that narrative that her government has been vindicated despite the limitations that Wyant has said in this report.
I continue to maintain hope and optimism that government and the Premier always has the chance to do the right thing. I seem to recall a certain Premier standing up in a video and saying that she would be like former PC or Premiers and would admit when she was wrong. And there's an opportunity right now for Premier Smith to admit that she's wrong. She has those opportunities every single day to come forward and say, look, this is going to be only resolved if we have a full public inquiry. I certainly wouldn't turn that away if the Premier wants to have a change of heart and do that. It would be the right thing to do. It's what Albertans want to see happen. And frankly, until that happens, this issue will continue to, and these allegations will continue to plague the trust that Albertans have in the Premier, and the Minister of Health, the Minister of Justice, and this government as an entirety. So if I were to give some free political advice to the Premier, I would say, if you want this corrupt care scandal to go away, call the full public inquiry. We can get to the heart of the answers on this issue, and Albertans can move on to the more important priorities that they have around healthcare, education, cost of living in their lives.
Thank you. And up next online is Jack Farrell. Go ahead.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep, thank you.
Awesome. Just a question for, I think, probably the deputy leader. Just on the teacher strike, so the ATA announced this morning that they had rejected a request from the government to end the strike effective Monday and take part in some enhanced mediation. Jason Schilling said they're going to, not do that. They're turning down the request because the government wouldn't discuss class size caps as part of the mediation. Just kind of looking for your overall reaction to that news and the thought that it's looking like week 3 of the strike is all but guaranteed here.
Well, I will say, first of all, that our colleague, Amanda Chapman, the Shadow Minister of Education, will be making a statement later today on that issue. I am in the same position as many thousands of parents across the province right now of having 2 school-age kids at home with me who should and would rather be in school. I have my husband is a teacher, and he's pretty eager to get back to work as well, and that he shares those views with the thousands and thousands of teachers who have been making their voices heard. Just yesterday morning in Edmonton, we saw an outstanding and incredible statement from Alberta teachers and parents and students who all want to get back to the classroom, who all want to invest in public education and see the supports our students need. And we've been really clear. We've been saying all along, the ball is in the UCP's court. They need to listen to Alberta teachers and parents and students and come forward with an offer that's going to legitimately address the concerns that have been created over 6 years of underfunding and undermining public education that have resulted in giant class sizes and increased complexity. The UCP needs to come forward with an offer that's going to address those issues in a real, meaningful way, and then everybody can get back to school, teachers can get back to work, parents can get back to work without worrying about what their kids are up to at home, and that's a win-win for all of us. So the ball is in the UCP's court. I certainly would like to see my kids get back to school as fast as possible, and so I sincerely hope that the UCP will listen to Albertans and put forward a deal, get back to the bargaining table with a real offer, and end this strike.
Thank you. And Jack, if you have a follow-up?
No, I'm good. Thank you, guys.
All right, we'll look back at the room. We'll have one more chance for the room here. Yeah, one last question.
Yeah. This might be for the House Leader. The Standing Committee on Resource Stewardship has been conducting a review of the Public Interest Disclosure Whistleblower Protection Act, and I'm wondering if the recommendations in the Wyant report will somehow be incorporated into that committee's work, or whether there's any other ways you will address the recommendations in the legislature coming up.
Thank you. That's a really good question. At this point, I can't speak on behalf of that committee. I do know they've been going through their work, and at the same time, government legislation has been introduced that impacts what's going on. It's been an interesting time to be on that committee. But what I will do is circle back around with our members on that committee. And can you answer this question?
I can try.
Well, I was just going to say we would get back to you, but if Sarah Hoffman can provide an answer.
I'll do my best, and then we can get back, sorry. I was in the committee at the last meeting we had, and we were calling for Enhanced Whistleblower Protection Act measures, especially in all the different AHS now pillars. You know, there's 9 CEOs, there's 9 agencies that feel that they can't speak up freely. So we were calling on more opportunities for people to be able to testify to the committee, including touring the province and being able to speak up. And at that stage, it was shut down by the UCP. It seems like they don't want to do much in the public light, but yeah, Christina can get you more details. But that's what happened in the last committee meeting.
All right, one last look at the room here, if there's any other questions from the room. All right, otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks.